Hey, Indian Creek 8th grade students, it's Professor Blazek, and I'd like to welcome you to part 4 in our video series on World War I, looking at how America gets involved. Now, the guiding question that I would like you to keep in mind as you watch this video is, what events led to America's involvement in World War I? Now, when World War I began, there were many American citizens and political leaders who felt that the United States had no reason to join the war. They felt that this conflict had nothing to do with America or American territories, and they also felt that sending soldiers into a war in Europe would create nothing more than meaningless deaths. However, many Americans did begin to take sides in the war because at this point in time, over one-third of Americans were either foreign born or children of immigrants. So a lot of Americans still had very close ties to Europe. Americans would support both sides as there were many German immigrants who supported the Central Powers, but support for the Allies was far more common, especially due to the history and ties between America and Great Britain and France. Now, both sides of the war saw gaining America's support as a worthwhile cause, and they would each use propaganda to try to gain support. Propaganda is information designed to influence opinion, and a couple of examples of propaganda are shown there to the right. Propaganda was also common within the warring countries as a way to rally national support for the war, to create a sense of national pride, and to vilify or dehumanize the opposing side. Much of the propaganda also included horror stories about the opposing side, again preaching to the us versus them mentality that composed a large part of nationalism, as we discussed in an earlier video. Propaganda would become a popular entity in the world moving forward, as we would see a large amount of it used in World War II as well. Now, in line with the imperialist wishes to expand a nation's power and economy, America saw World War I as a great opportunity to broaden its economic power. American industry originally aimed to trade with nations on both sides of the war because, as a neutral nation, it had no loyalties as far as who it could sell products to, and selling to both sides would provide the largest amount of consumers for American goods. However, Great Britain's blockade made trade with Germany basically impossible, but America would continue to trade with both Britain and France, each of whom would borrow billions of dollars to pay for war costs. This would help America's economy boom during this time, but it also outraged Germany because this created the appearance that America had sided only with the Allies, and this would have major ramifications moving forward. Now, in 1915, Germany would begin using U-boats to prevent supplies from reaching Great Britain, as we discussed in the prior video. And on May 7th of that year, a U-boat would sink the Lusitania, which was a British passenger ship sailing near Ireland. Over 1,000 people would die in this attack, including 128 Americans. Now, America was obviously outraged at this event due to the loss of American lives. And this outrage remained even when it was later learned that the Lusitania carried war materials, which would have been a major reason for the German attack. Now, as the war continued, America would begin expanding its military, even though President Wilson held to the hope that America could avoid getting involved. For the most part, Americans still agreed with Wilson's hope, and "he kept us out of war" would actually become Wilson's slogan during his reelection campaign in 1916. In addition, Germany would pledge to warn all neutral ships before attacking, and this came in the wake of another attack that injured several Americans who were aboard the French Sussex, which was another ship attacked by the German Navy. Now, there was hope that this would alleviate any tensions lingering amongst Americans. However, American outrage would soon escalate. And it would escalate in February of 1917 when German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann sent a telegram to Mexico that asked for Mexico's support in the war. This would be known as the Zimmermann telegram, and it was intercepted by Great Britain. Now, in the telegram, Zimmermann offered to return New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona to Mexico if Germany could gain Mexico's support. Now, this telegram would be published by newspapers worldwide, and it was obviously met by widespread outrage in America. This would go on to change the mind of many Americans about the dangers of remaining neutral in the face of threats against the country, because this is exactly what the Zimmermann telegram was. Now, in the weeks following the Zimmermann telegram, several other events would occur that would push America closer to the war. First of all, Russia would experience a revolution in which the Tsar or leader was overthrown. And the new government that took control of Russia would promise democratic elections, which Americans obviously met with a positive response. Now, in addition, Germany would actually go back on its word and sink 4 more American ships, killing 36 more people. Now, President Wilson continued to struggle with turning to war, even though it looked much more likely. But in the end, he would realize that the war, especially in the wake of Russia's new democratic government, could now be boiled down to a fight between democracy and autocracy. And autocracy means a government where one individual has complete power. Now, this political battle was one that America could identify with more easily. And you will see throughout history that America and other democratic governments will always take threats to democracy and the opportunity to spread democracy very seriously. So all of these events would come to a head on April 6th of 1917, when the United States would declare war on Germany. And shortly after this declaration of war, on May 18th, Congress would pass the Selective Service Act, which established a military draft. 3 million men would be drafted to fight in the war alongside the 2 million Americans who volunteered to serve. Now, as America prepared for war, thousands of women would also enlist to serve in non-combat jobs, such as nurses, clerks, and radio operators, in addition to some 300,000 African Americans who would enlist in the armed forces. African Americans would sadly often face discrimination and racism despite their willingness to fight for America. So the makeup of the military force that America would take into World War I would look very different than any other force it had previously had. Now, America's entry into the war came at a very important time for the Allies, especially due to the fact that many Allied troops were exhausted from the incredibly arduous experiences of trench warfare. In addition, many Allied nations were experiencing shortages of supplies and food, which American farmers and manufacturers could help remedy. America would also develop a convoy system for shipping, which would use teams of destroyers to escort ships across the Atlantic Ocean on their way to Allied shores. This would majorly reduce shipping losses because the destroyers would prevent cargo ships from being attacked. America's Navy would also aid in the destruction of German U-boats, which again helped make the Atlantic Ocean a much safer place for Allied ships. So these were some of the early impacts that America would have on the war. So this is the end of part 4 in our World War I video series. And once more, here is our guiding question for you to consider. And there are a number of events that could be included in your response. In our next video, we will talk about life at home for Americans during the war. Until then, this has been Professor Blazek, and I will see you next time.